Today on the Vintage Electronics channel, we're going to talk about the Tascam 112 stereo cassette deck, and we're going to try to get this one to work, so stick around. The Tascam 112 was built as a professional tape deck and was introduced in the mid-1980s. It packs a wealth of professional features such as HX Pro, pitch control, 2 large VU meters, Dolby B and C noise reduction, as well as a large digital tape counter with zero return. Now, some reviewers back in the day said that this unit, having a retail price between $500 and $700, hit a very low price point for a professional unit. Now, this was made possible by using just 2 heads instead of 3 as in other professional models. One such model is the Tascam 122, which was the predecessor of the 112. Now, this one had a 3-head system, bias control, and other features that made it much more suitable for professional use. It also had a price tag to match. Now, let's get back to this one. I picked it up on eBay recently for about $30. Now, the previous owner said it had a hard time loading and ejecting tapes. It wouldn't play, but it would fast forward and rewind. Now, the unit also has a motorized transport that comes up to meet the cassette, and I'm betting that has something to do with the reason why it won't load or eject a cassette properly. The belts in it are probably completely gone. This unit is over 30 years old, so I'm sure they've turned to goop. Now, the first thing we got to do is take the screws out of the case to gain access to all the good parts inside. So I want to take the 2 screws off of either side and also the 2 screws in the back. Obviously, make sure it's unplugged first, but I think that goes without saying. Now, once we get the 2 screws off in the back, we should be able to slide this case cover back and off of the unit, revealing all of the guts on the inside. For its age, it actually looks pretty good in here. There's a lot less dust than I expected. But if we look up there towards the top on those pulleys, we can see the remnants of where the belts used to be. Now, this model has 3 motors in it. It has one for the capstan here. The belt's missing on that. It has a direct drive for the fast forward and rewind. That's why that worked. But look at this one here. This is for the mechanism that brings the head and the pinch roller up to the capstan for play. There is belt gunk everywhere. Well, I guess it's going to be easier to clean all this and put the belts on if we take the cassette mechanism out, which on these Tascams isn't too terribly bad. There's a couple of screws up towards the top here, and then if we get down to the side, there's 2 on the left to take out, and then there's 2 more on the right-hand side that have to come out as well. Now, you may have to move some wires or cut some wire ties to get some wires out of the way. Just be very, very careful as you're in here not to touch any of the contacts or bridge any of the connections or capacitors. We sure don't want to damage anything. Then we can carefully pull the entire mechanism out of the way, and then we'll just set it somewhere where we can get to the screws on the side. What we want to do is separate the mechanism in the front from the circuit boards and everything in the back. Now, this is pretty simple on this unit. There's only 4 screws, 2 on each side. Now we can very carefully pull the mechanism away from the circuit board in the case. Now, a word of warning, if you're not familiar with these models, take a picture of where all these connectors plug in before you start taking them out. It'll make reassembly a whole lot easier. Once we get all the connectors out, we should be able to pull the unit away from the chassis. Now, with the unit out, you can actually see what we're working with here. The motor for the capstan is completely covered on the pulley with the goop from the old belt. The rest of it's actually laying down on the flywheel. Over on the mechanism drive, the same thing. We've got old belt that's perished all over the place. So we're going to have a little bit of work to get this off of here. Now, to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to try to remove the motors or the pulleys from the tape drive unit. First thing we need to do is remove this soft eject cylinder here. This is what actually makes the door open smoothly when you hit the eject button. Just a couple of screws and a hook that'll take that off of there. Next, we'll need to work on taking the 2 halves of the assembly apart. We'll need to get those apart to be able to get all of the remnants of the old belts off, as well as to get the new belts on. In this particular model, there's about 4 screws that hold it all together, and we'll make quick work of that here. With all the screws out, both halves of the mechanism should fold over out of the way. We'll just need to get those off to the side so that we can work a little bit easier here. Now once those are off, we can see the flywheel and all of the mechanism. Now you can actually see a piece of the old belt there, and just touching it, I'm getting the stuff on my fingers already. It's pretty nasty. You can see around the flywheel where the belt has just turned to mush. It's stuck around the entire edge of that. We're going to have to clean that off, as well as that mechanism. If we don't, the new belts will just stick and it'll create even more problems. So I like to use a screwdriver just to get the bulk of that material off of there. The more we can get off now, the less time it's going to take, and the easier it'll be once we get our alcohol and our Q-tips out. Now, I like to use regular isopropyl rubbing alcohol for this. It seems to work really well to dissolve the rubber that's left over once those belts break down. On this one, the flywheel here probably had the most rubber residue on it. It probably took 10 or 15 minutes to get the residue off of this one, but I just kept going over it and over it with more alcohol, with a dry towel, back and forth until all of the residue was gone. Now make sure you take your time on it and get all of it off of there, because it ends up all over the inside of that compartment, on the motor casings, everywhere. So take your time, go through, use the screwdriver to get most of it off, and then go back with your alcohol and get it nice and clean. Anything that's left over could actually make the new belt stick and tear, and that would be a bad deal. So your patience will be rewarded on this step of the process. Now after all that hard cleaning, we can finally get to the process that we started all this for, the new belts. These I ordered online. They cost about $20 for the set, and that was shipped, so pretty reasonable for those. First step will be to get the flywheel and the capstan belt just put around the flywheel. That's the part that we can't get to with the case on. And same thing with the one for the cassette mechanism. Now we need to make sure we get it around that cam, because it actually straddles that going around from the motor to the pulley. Next, we'll get everything situated back on top of the mechanism, because I want to get the screws put back in to hold everything nice and tight while we're trying to put those belts on. If we have it loose, we could run the risk of possibly pinching the belt in one of the joints, and then we're going to have to take it all apart again. So I go ahead and put it together now to make the process a little bit easier going forward. So the couple of screws back in, we can get the belt put on for the cassette mechanism. You just want to make sure to rotate that around, make sure everything's free, nothing's caught, and that the belt is straight. We don't want that kinked. Now on the other side, for the capstan, this belt's a little bit tougher to get to. It's kind of a tight squeeze, but if you take your time, get your fingers in there, you can actually get that on there without too much trouble at all. Now since we have the cassette mechanism out, it's going to be a whole lot easier to clean the head, so I'm going to go ahead and do that while we have the mechanism out of the deck. We'll make sure we clean the playhead, the erase head, and I'm also going to go ahead and clean the capstan as well. Now nothing was too terribly dirty on this one, but it's still a good idea to go ahead and clean it while you've got the access. Once you get it put back together, it's a little bit tighter of a fit, and it's a little harder to get in there. So now we can put it all back together, just the opposite of how we took it apart. Be sure to get all of the screws in, all of your wires in the correct places, and yes, I am going to clean that residue off of there. That stuff really sticks to your fingers. Let's get it all put back together and see how it sounds.